going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Luminance Live. We are back in my home studio, and we're basically kind of going back to a little bit more of the kind of more how-to type of videos that we've done in the past. If you are new to Lumix Live, welcome. These are weekly broadcasts that we do either from here in my home studio or out in the field, more recently with the firmware update that we provided for the GH5 Mark II. But across the board, we'll do either conversations about technology, about the cameras, software that's out there. We'll also do interviews with filmmakers, photographers, just people from across different aspects of the industry. And really to be able to just provide a touch point for all of you into the brand. So like today's particular video, this is really going to talk a lot about some of the cool features that we offer in some of these cameras. We've already done one of these streams a couple months ago or a couple weeks ago. Time is a bit of a blur this year. And hopefully provide all of you some different aspects of things that our cameras offer that you may not necessarily know are in the camera, or you may have questions about how they work. So, like it says in the description, these are interactive streams. So if you have questions for me, drop them in the chat by tagging @Lumix Cameras, like you can see I did in the first comment. That means that it'll pop up on my screen. It'll give me a little highlight thing, so I know that it's a question that's directed right towards me and not necessarily everybody else in the chat. Even though I've got a couple of things that I want to talk about today with, I'm going to be using my S1H here to connect in and demo off of. The questions don't have to be just about the things I'm talking about. If you've got other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If I can get to them, I'll definitely get to them. Let me see here. I think that's kind of the main wrap of what goes on. Like we said, we do these things every Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. We are actually gearing up for basically a really exciting next year. So those of you that have been tuning in for the actual live broadcast of these, I'm just going to give everyone a heads up. The next 2 weeks are going to be pre-recorded. I'm taking a little bit of time off from doing these streams, not necessarily vacation time, but prepping for CES. We will be out at CES for the big Panasonic booth. If you've been to CES before, or if you're planning on going, make sure to come stop by the Panasonic booth. I'll be there. Matt Frazier will be there. And we'll be showing off the Lumix lineup. But more importantly, we're also going to be live streaming from CES. So we'll have more information and details, stream links, all that kind of stuff ready to go. And I'll bring this back up at the end of the stream as well. But we are going to be broadcasting from CES with some, interviews with different companies. So it's not going to be just about photography. We're working out some plans to be able to go talk with, reps from companies like NVIDIA and AMD and Intel and different computer manufacturers, to kind of help show those of you who may not be able to get to CES or have no interest in going to CES so that you guys can experience some of it as well. We'll also be doing a single live stream every day with Matt and I, which will be at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So we'll have a full schedule set up so you don't have to necessarily worry too much about scheduling. These will be all-day streams, so it'll be one link and you'll be able to just tune in when the segment that we're going to be running interests you and you would like to join in. Yeah, so I think that's kind of it for general programming kind of updates. I want to remind everybody, like I always do every week, we have Lumix Pro services available here in the US and abroad. In the United States, we have 2 tiers. We have the Red and the Platinum tier. So Red tier is free. If you own a Lumix camera, you should be getting yourself registered. Get on the Red tier. It's free. Just get it going. We also have the Platinum tier, which is a kind of more premium version of our Lumix Pro services. This gets you a bit more features and benefits in this program. So outside of what you get in the basic program, the Lumix Red, which is your extended 3-year warranty for those here in the United States. I know in other countries, warranty specifications are different. But in the U.S., if you register for RED, you get your 3-year warranty extended with with your camera. You have an online portal, all that kind of fun stuff. But if you go into the Platinum tier, that's where you get a lot more of the, what I'd say, more professional ready support. So you get a direct hotline into our team. So if you've got troubleshooting and some issues, you're able to contact directly in with us and actually speak to somebody. You also get access to 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if there's any kind of issue that is something that wouldn't be covered under manufacturer warranty, you can get a discount on the repairs for that. You get 2-day turnaround times with next day shipping both ways prepaid. You also get a nice welcome gift and your sensor cleanings, EVF cleanings, all that kind of fun stuff that you would probably be using if you're a professional and you work out in the field. So in the chat, I'm going to drop a link for the US version of the Lumix Pro Services program. If you are joining us from outside of the United States, I've just dropped the link to the kind of global portal. So if you are looking to see if Lumix Pro Services is available in your country, go to the second link that I dropped in there. That will get you over to the kind of overview page for which countries are currently up online with the program. And then keep an update on that page if your country's not listed or your region's not listed for when more come online. So let's see here. Let's take a look and see if there are some questions that have come in. And as a reminder, if you've got those questions, tag at Lumix Cameras. That's where I can see them on here and I can address them. So let's see here. The first question from Oscar says, when would you be adding live composite feature to the G9? Truthfully, I don't know if the G9 can or will get live view composite. That is something that we've talked about a lot especially over the last year and a half since we've had more cameras come out with it. Truthfully, I don't know if if there's any kind of hardware limitation that keeps it from having that. Like I know when the G9 came out, everyone wanted the GH5 to get high res shot, but that was a physical limitation. And even for the GH5 Mark II, I don't know if that's a physical limitation because of the stabilization unit that's used between the different cameras. There are different designs being used in different cameras. So I don't know if live view composite is something that can or will come to a G9. It is in the GH5 Mark II. It was added as a firmware update in the recent update that we did publish. And if you are looking for a source of where all of the, kind of the firmware information is, you can take a look at the link that I just dropped in the chat. That'll bring you to like our kind of notice page of, hey, this firmware update's coming and this is what's in it, so you can get yourself prepared. It also has a link over to the actual download page where you can get the firmware installed. So, yeah, unfortunately, the G9 doesn't have live view composite, and I don't know if it's going to happen, so... let's see here. Hi, Sean. Not exactly a lesser known, but when it comes to recording 4K, 6K photo bursts from a FZ82 to the S1R, how different from making just 4K, 6K video? How is it different from making a 4K, 6K photo or video? So one of the big key things to remember with 4K or 6K photo is that they are hard frame rates. And what I mean by that is when it says that it's doing 30 or 60 frames per second, depending on which camera you have, it's doing a true 30 frames per second or a true 60 frames per second, where video footage is 9 out of 10 times, unless you've got a GH5, GH5S, GH5 Mark II, or something like an S1H, you're going to be shooting in things like 23.98, 39.9, I can never forget what the other things are, but you're not shooting at true whole frame rates. And that's because it accounts for broadcast, things like that, and editing software. So when you use something like 4K or 6K photo, there's no audio. Yes, it's a video file that comes out, but it's designed to be used in a very different, kind of method. The early times of 4K photo, that's when people started realizing that with the GH5, you were able to shoot in 4:3 aspect ratio, or I think it's GH4 or GH5. I think it might have actually been GH4. You're able to shoot in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which was perfect for anamorphic shooters. So that's one of the reasons why those modes kind of transitioned into video features. The other thing is how the camera can handle those files. If you shoot bursts in 4K or 6K photo with a lot of the newer cameras, I think this is like G85 and newer. I'd have to double check which camera we started this on. You get the option in the menu to do things like bulk saving. So instead of having to save out every individual image, you can just have it save out all individual JPEGs. The other main difference is that in 4K photo, 6K photo, if you do it that way, where you save the image out on the camera and use either the UI that comes up after you've shot the image, what it will do is it will actually write the metadata to that JPEG, where if you do this with video, it doesn't, because video metadata is different than photo metadata. So if you're someone who likes to be able to organize your photos based off metadata, use 4K, 6K photo mode to capture stills out of it versus using a video file that's being designed and shot as a video file to pull stills from. Obviously, you can do either of them, and they're both going to look fine, but the 4K photo mode gives you more photo-oriented features. Even 4K photo mode lets you do, in newer cameras, lets you do a more advanced noise reduction. You can do skew correction. A lot of those kinds of things. So that's definitely actually really kind of a lesser known feature, is that you have all of those extra features with 4K, 6K photo that you don't have in other cameras, and a lot of times people don't realize that they're there. Let's see here. Are there any new things expected from Panasonic at CES, or just overview of recent stuff? What I'm involved with CES, with the Lumix Live broadcasts, and actually physically working the booth, which is why I was saying if you're going to be there, come, you can talk to Matt and I in person. I don't have the big enough schedule yet from CES as to what's going on. I just know that we're going to be broadcasting, and I'm going to be in Vegas for a while. So it'll be nice to actually get back out on the road, but keep tuned into everything that we've got going on our social channels. If you're on our email lists, make sure to go get on our email list, and you'll be the first to know of what's going on, the schedule for Lumix Live, that kind of stuff, and what CES is all about this year. Let's see here. Steve says, with the G9 high-res shot mode, is there a way to get the raw data in monochrome? Does it move the sensor about to get every pixel in the same place for each color? Like a monochrome. So there isn't a way to get the data in monochrome because the sensor is recording, it's capturing color, it's going through a Bayer filter. So it's not a true monochrome camera like a monochrome or an actual black and white monochrome sensor. What the high resolution shot does is it shifts the image 8 times by half pixels, basically in a circular pattern. And then it combines that information in to create your high-resolution shot. So that's how you get a 4 times resolution bump. Even though we're taking 8 pictures, you get better color, better gradation. You get lower noise when you use high-resolution shot. But yeah, it's getting just a better overall image. Now, some people will argue about resolution, what that actually means. But the actual pixel resolution that you get out of the camera is 4 times what the sensor's resolution is. So if it's a 20 megapixel sensor, that's why you get that 80 megapixel. In an S1R, that's why you get 187, I believe. So yeah, you have a couple different options there. But yeah, there's no way to get monochrome raw data out of it. You do get a raw file. You get a raw still image, but it's a color image. If you shoot it in monochrome, then you get the monochrome, but that's the converted monochrome from color. Let's see here. Odyssey says, why the S1R battery dies at approximately 20 to 30% state of charge when using battery pack. You have 6 new Lumix batteries. The S1 doesn't have such an issue. Main thing I'd say is check and make sure that your firmware is updated on the S1R. Check that check and make sure that the power saving settings are the same between your S1 and your S1R. I'm trying to think what else to check, because I don't run into that issue, and I use my S1R a lot. Now, granted, as a lot of people who've been following the channel know, my S1R is a converted S1R, so it's not a standard run-of-the-mill S1R. But yeah, I would just check and make sure all your power saving settings are the same between your S1 and your S1R to see if there's anything different between them. In some cases, it could be something as simple as the S1's got a better, or you have it set up differently for power saving versus the S1, or versus the S1R. I know that there was a firmware update that got pushed, and then we released another one really quickly after it. That did correct stuff like that. Then okay, so I see your reply at Odyssey. If it's consistently doing something like where the battery is dying at the same exact point all the time, then at that point I would suggest you reach out to the service team and actually get it in so that an engineer can actually take a look and see if there's something wrong with the camera. Yeah, short of that, you're going to probably get 1,000,001 different answers online from people who either have no clue what they're talking about, or people who work for the company like myself that have a couple ideas as to where to at least have you look before you go into a service department. But yeah, the only real way to know if there's an actual problem, if it's a consistent issue for you, is to get it into the service team and have them take a look at it. Yeah. And if you're not, if you're in the U.S. and you're not already part of Lumix Pro Service, that could be a good reason to go get Lumix Pro Service the Platinum tier. Yeah, in the U.S. it's like $200 for Platinum, but that gets you that 2-day turnaround time, the hotline in with our people there, and I think right now we're still running the promotion where it's only a single S series camera to be qualified for it. Yeah, so as long as you have one S Pro series camera, which is all the S series cameras, you'd be able to get in and not have to have like a whole bunch of lenses and cameras and stuff like that. Let's see here. Marcus says, how can I find out if the color noise in my footage is from the sensor or from circumstances like lighting conditions? I often get noise in the footage when the lighting should just be okay. That will be a very... It's a relatively subjective answer that anyone's going to be able to give you other than yourself. With noise in an image, there's a number of different factors. Heat can cause noise in a camera, but our cameras are designed thermally to prevent that. High ISOs obviously are one of the biggest, kind of proponents of noise in an image, or causes of noise in an image. The other thing that causes noise is underexposure and boosting an image back up. Yes, in most cases, you are able to shoot at a base ISO or a native ISO and then bring an image up, and it would be similar and almost, in some cases, identical to doing it in camera. But from what you've described, it's really hard to be able to tell where that noise would be coming from and how to determine what the noise is. If it's a still image and you're getting noise there, that's going to be really hard to determine where your actual noise is, because if light is okay, it may look okay, but you got to look at, the different lighting and stuff like that. Let's see here. So ISO's not above 8,000, and you think it's not heat. Yeah, well, for us, it wouldn't be heat with us. Heat generation causing noise. Truthfully, with those two pieces of information, I would be willing to bet that it's probably an underexposed image, based on the overall thing, especially if it's in video. And as I can see here, and if you're using Vlog, you want to make sure that you're protecting your shadows, not underexposing them too far. Yes, you have latitude, but Log profiles have very different noise correction. If you're shooting in RAW for video, it's even more different in that case. So you can see why there's a whole lot of different things that can kind of come into play as to where the noise could be coming from. It could also be noise coming in from the color grade that could be working. But all of those things hinge on how you're working with the footage afterwards. So if you make sure that it's exposed properly, using the tools in the camera, which I can pull up on my S1H and show you a couple of the tools, which are actually some of the things I want to talk about today. Those things can help you avoid points where you'd end up getting low noise. The other thing is with the S-Series cameras, if it's an S-Series camera that you're using, I don't think you've mentioned if it's an S-Series camera or not. If it's an S-Series camera, you have native ISO points to consider as well. So like if you're shooting at 3200 ISO on an S-Series camera in Vlog, don't shoot at 3200. Go up to 4000 ISO, and it's going to be much cleaner than 3200. And then adjust your lighting or your exposure accordingly to kind of help that. That's what native ISOs do for you as you start to go up higher in that range. Let's see here. Carl asks, is there a way to connect the exposure metering with the active AF point? Yes, there is a way to do it, but it's for spot AF. It's not for, you know, kind of multimetering or center weighted or things like that. If I jump over, so I have my S1H plugged in here. If I go into my metering modes, you'll see that I can put my camera into my spot metering mode, which is obviously going to massively change my exposure. But then I can go in and let me remember where this is. This would be with... It's going to be in... Come on, which page was it on? It might be under custom settings. It's in here somewhere. I know that there's... Maybe it's not in that part. Maybe it's in this. So if I go and say put this right there, and I bring myself over to here, it would help if I was moving the focus point and not my... Okay, so you see how... Let me see if I can turn this off. There it is. So you see how there is the cross on my... let me put my camera on. So you can see how there's a cross in the focus point that I just moved up onto that ROG Strix logo. That is single point metering, so spot metering, and that will stay tied to your AF point. You can decouple it if you have the touch display on, where you can change it and decouple them for a little bit. But by default, your single, like one area focus with the... or actually almost any of the focus points with the center point, or man, I'm blanking on the name of what we call it. Spot metering, that's the word. Spot metering will link to your AF point. Now, that's not always going to be the best solution for a lot of people. A lot of times you don't necessarily want to be using spot metering, because like if you saw there, if I point it, say like on my shirt, or I point it on that motherboard box, it's going to look everything else is going to look very blown out because you're doing a spot meter. You're not accounting for highlights and shadows. So for some people it can work, for others it might not work, but that's what you can do in our cameras for linking your AF point and your exposure. So let's see here. All right. So is there any way to... Okay, so that was the connecting there. Let's see here. Jonathan says, is there a way to have a shortcut assigned button to focal length feature for manual lenses? Many times when I change lenses, the option comes up, but it appears, but it disappears quickly. So if you're using manual lenses, the only way that menu disappears quickly is if you're hitting something. That's about the only thing that I can say about that. Depending on the camera that you use will also vary on what level of control you have for programming in different lenses. Like on the S1H, and I'll see if I can get to the menu and basically show you where this would be. I think it's under lenses. Yes, here we go. So on a camera like the S1H, you have the ability to do lens info confirmation, which will prompt you when you put it on there to say like, hey, is this the lens you're still using? Do you want to make sure you're still using this lens, so that it calibrates the in-body stabilization based on the focal length. But then if you're using lenses that have that don't have information, and I'm just going to disconnect my lens here and see. When you don't have a lens attached here, this is where you can come in and actually kind of program in different modes here. And of course I freaked the camera out because I disconnected my lens. So I'll go back into that menu here. So you'll see I can go in and program, at least on the S1H, I can go in and program and change, you know, what focal length do I want to use? What aspect ratio or sensor size is that lens designed for? So image circle, I can go in and say, is it a Super 35 lens or is it a full frame lens? What is the focal length of the lens? Now, the focal length is always going to be the focal length of the lens itself, not the converted focal length or your field of view converted focal length. You're programming in what the lens is that you're putting on the camera. So I have one of my setups here set up for this TT Artisan 11mm fisheye that I use. And this is where I can come in and also change, well, as I start looking at the IS values, I can start changing some of these different effects here and really kind of dial in the lens that I'm using. Once something like that is saved, when you actually power the camera off and then power it back on, because I have the lens calibration thing set up, actually because there's no lens attached to it, it's not going to prompt me for it. But let me put this other lens. Let me put this other lens back on, so that yeah, we can have everything good here. There we go. All right. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of more information. You, like I said, for a situation where you want to have that pop up, you got to make sure that, you know, you're not either clicking or hitting something, which could be as simple as like half pressing the shutter button. That'll make that menu go away. Those are kind of the things to just keep an eye on. Let's see here. Marcus says, yes, it's properly exposed in the S5. Okay, so for the noise issue. I'd still probably ask how are you judging that it's properly exposed? I'm not trying to diminish what properly exposed is, but there can also be what is technically properly exposed for the cleanest looking image versus what is artistically properly exposed. If you find that, say, in the shadows, you know, you're getting more noise, usually that's an indication, if the rest of the image looks good, you may be underexposing for that region of the image. That's where the tool like the Luminance Spot Meter can definitely really help here. So if I go into my settings here, and I believe Luminance Spot Meter is under my main camera settings. Could be wrong though. It's been a little while since I worked with my, and that's of course because I'm in a photo mode. So let's change over to video. There we go. So for this particular case, this is where, like I said, something like Luminance Spot Meter can become a very, very good tool for someone that's working with exposure on these cameras. And I feel like an idiot now because I can't figure out where Luminance Spot Meter was on the menu. There it is. So it's going to be in monitor, display, photo, or video. When you go into Luminance Spot Meter, if you turn it on, this is where I can go in and actually drag this around and pick where my exposure is set up. So if you find out that, you know, you're looking at the deep shadow region of the image, you may find that, you know, in a case where if I have the camera set up in Vlog, it may say that that spot's actually like 8 stops underexposed, which is more than you can really pull back. So when you're doing your grading and bringing the shadows back up, if that's what you're doing, that's where you're introducing noise. Typically, shadow regions, if you want to keep as much of that kind of contrast and dynamic look as you want, that's where external lighting's really going to give you the big help. If you don't have external lighting, then it's going to be probably more down to just boosting your exposure in the camera, knowing that you have a lot more headroom than you probably think you do, especially if you're shooting in a native ISO, because you can overexpose, quote unquote, you can overexpose the image a lot more and get right up to the highlight clipping point, so shoot just underneath it, which is going to naturally bring your shadows up, which means if you want them darker, you're actually going to be pushing them back down because you're going to be bringing your highlights back. Not talking about grading footage, but if you... So where is your noise coming from then? That's kind of, I guess, the question, and what does it look like? Marcus, yeah. So, okay. Jonathan says... disappears without touching the camera at all. That's kind of interesting. It shouldn't be disappearing if you're not touching the camera. Let's see. Let's go into settings. Lens confirmation is on. So let's turn my camera off. I just put my manual lens on here. Interesting. Does not want to work properly right now. Okay, I'll have to take a look at seeing what's up with that particular shooting scenario then, Jonathan. It's been a while since I've actually shot and had to set up stabilization without with an external lens. Okay. All right, so let's go back into my photo mode here. Let's see, did I miss any questions before I move on? Point and shoot media. So I can't find the menu anywhere, but I'm looking for the setting to turn off exposure preview when half pressing for autofocus on GH5 Mark II on manual. Exposure preview. So you'd be looking for constant preview. If constant preview is turned on, that may be where you're getting some of that issue from. That could be what the cause is running in for you, because it's not called exposure preview. Constant preview is going to be under the custom wrench. So let's go back here. Constant preview is going to be under the wrench icon, or the cog icon that you can see here. And it should be under the monitor display photo. Yes, this is an S1H, but the menus are going to be pretty close between the S1H and the GH5 Mark II. And then constant preview will be right here, and you can turn that off. The other thing is you can go constant preview set, and depending on the camera and which generation it is, you may have more options in this particular menu for while you're manually focusing. So yeah, look for constant preview. That should help out with that particular issue. All right, let's see. What other, any other questions that came in here? Turn off exposure preview. A shortcut button will be great too. Let me see here. So, as far as lens goes, I know that we've brought it up before about, at least to our engineers, about getting a custom function for that menu. I can't say that it's going to happen or that it will happen. It just know that it is one of those things that we have brought up to see if it's something that can be put into the camera. Certain menu options, because of either how, because of them being multiple steps, in some cases that's why they're not added as a function button addition. But one thing, maybe at least to kind of like help in the midterm with you, Jonathan, would be to set up a My Menu on the camera, which you would do by clicking Menu, going to the little person icon, click Add, and then you can add the different menu options that you use primarily, and then you can have it set up so that it automatically, when you press the menu button, goes to that My Menu. You can also turn on, if it's a feature that you use often enough, this is also where you would turn on Menu Resume, which is found under... Which menu option is that found under? I will have to look and see where that menu option is, but there's also typically a menu resume option, which when you press the menu will go back to the previous button that you were in. Super 35 APS-C mode. This question comes from Carl. Possible to switch on off with just one push of an FN button. It's only possible by dialing through 3 possible settings of APS-C pixel. So that's another one I know that we've asked about, is can you just get a single button to toggle between the two? As far as I know, probably the only one that I think you can do currently is you can program to have that menu pop up, which then lets you select them. And you also can put it into the quick menu to be able to pick which shooting mode you're using. I'm just looking here to see if I can find where it would be quickly. So image, yeah. So you see here, I can program my function button to do image area video. So now when I press that direction on the dial, now it lets me do and pick which mode I want. So yes, a single button would be really, really nice to have, but right now you've got the option to just come in here and select which mode you're basically using. So let's drop this down to something that I can show all of the frame rates at. That'll also still play through my ATEM. There we go. Cool. All right. Okay, Jonathan says yeah, the My Menu setting is one of the... It's such a simple option that's added to these cameras, but it is something that I found incredibly useful, even though I'm coming a lot more from the photography side of it, because that just lets me, just like we have the in the newer cameras, you have that ability to do like my quality list, like what we've got here, where it's just the frame rates and resolutions that you like to shoot. Even though we've already had that, being able to just go in and say like, all right, this is my menu for video shooting. This is my menu for stills, for still shooting. You have that ability to click in here, go into that My Menu, and you can actually program in 3 different versions depending on the camera that you're running. So, yeah, cool. So one of the other kind of like lesser known features that I wanted to talk to a lot of people about here is actually more for the photography side of the business. If some of you haven't necessarily used it, or you may not necessarily run into a situation, and it's actually a very hard thing for me to demo here right now, but given that, you know, we're in the holiday season here, and a lot of times you may be photographing in an environment, and maybe not even just in the holiday season. You may be having to shoot video and also shoot photos in an environment where you've got really, really crappy lighting. You've got either, say you're in like a basketball court or something like that, with artificial indoor lighting that is flickering. We've all run into situations where you get flicker, and no matter what the situation in video, it's fairly easy to correct by using your shutter angle or your shutter speeds to get off of the angle that the flicker is. But in photography, you can run into some challenges where even with a mechanical shutter, you're still able to pick up flicker because of the frequency that those lights are cycling at and the frame rate or the shutter speed that your mechanical shutter fires at. So what we have in the S1H, and some other cameras have a very simplified version of this, is called flicker decrease for photo. What this mode does when you turn it on is in the top left of the screen, you'll see that you have the word flicker. And what that does is when it detects that there is cycling, repeating light in the frame with the shutter speed that you're shooting at, it will actually, if you're shooting in burst mode, it's going to help basically stagger the burst rate so that it doesn't fire a frame in the middle of one of those cycles. So you may notice when you use something like flicker decrease on, say, like an S1H, that your full burst rate is maybe, it feels like it might be stuttering a little bit, and that's because it is actually doing that on purpose to make sure that a frame isn't fired on a cycle. Now, mixed lighting can cause a lot more hecticness for this if you've got multiple different lighting sources. I tried to do it with the little like kind of LED lights that I have on that display on the bookcase behind me, but those LED lights are actually such horrible quality that they have other problems involved with them for filming. And I use Hue LEDs for pretty much everything that I do, and two Elgato lights that I've got actually spent a lot of time making sure that they don't do these kinds of things on video and photos, so it's actually really hard to demo it here. But if you're running into situations where you're seeing that kind of flicker, especially if you're photographing, say, like Christmas lights or something like that, or holiday lights, whatever you want to call them, and you notice that when you take one picture, some of the lights are all, kind of half are dimmed out, the others aren't. You can use flicker decrease in photo if you're on an S1H and some of the other cameras to kind of help mitigate that situation for you. Let's see here. FC, hey, welcome, says, I love my G9 IBIS Dual IS, and that's why I've been holding off buying a gimbal. Are there cases where a gimbal will come in handy over Dual IS? Yes, there will always be cases where a gimbal can provide you better results than a Dual IS can. And in fact, any in-camera stabilization. No matter how stable any of us are, there are certain camera movements that we make. Like if you're taking a camera and you're kind of like making a pushing, like a push-in movement and dropping the camera down, stabilization that's in our cameras is going to do an amazing job. And I would put it and say somewhere between 80 to 90% of the time, our stabilization in our Dual IS systems more than enough for what you would probably need in scenarios like that. But if you're doing something where it's fast-paced, where it's maybe at an odd angle, where you're not necessarily going to be, either the most flexible or the most comfortable to be able to hold a camera and move, a gimbal will definitely give you an added benefit in cases like that. The other place where a gimbal can still outperform in body stabilization would be in situations like if you're filming in a car, or you're filming, obviously attached to a car, or even if you're sitting in the car holding it. There are a lot of situations where just the range of flexibility and the extra dampening that a gimbal can provide, and the ability that they can keep everything level, can be a big benefit. And also, as Glenn points out, gimbal use can also depend on how much coffee you've had. That is actually a legitimate thing that you do also want to watch out for. If you're someone who stays fairly highly caffeinated, like I do, Our stabilization does an amazing job, but I still have an RSC2 for scenarios where I definitely want it more stable. If you watched the first Lumix Live that we did from the field with the GH5 Mark II, where I followed Todd around, that definitely had a benefit of using the gimbal versus just going handheld. Yes, the gimbal was heavier, but it definitely smooths out a lot of the walking scenarios, because it puts less stress on how much the camera moves, because it gets extra ability to be held in place. All I need is a small gimbal that fits in my bag nicely. Yeah, the RSC2, so I use a Peak Design, it's the Everyday Backpack. I think it's the 30 liter, or the bigger one that they make. That will fit my Peak Design travel tripod inside of it, and it will fit the RSC2 in there with basically 2 cameras. Now, I go with a very, very small package because I'm also usually riding on my bike, so everything can fit nicely in there, but the big thing I can advise on gimbals is don't buy cheap. Cheap gimbals, actually really anything cheap in the industry, when you buy cheap, you end up having to buy multiple times. So usually buy, the right one for the job. And some of the gimbals even just come with cases now, so. But I highly recommend the RS2 or the RSC2 because of the direct integration that we have with things like Active Track and the control that's available in basically all the S series now, with the USB cable right into the gimbal. So that adds a nice little extra level of control there for you. Let's see here. Alpha Studio, how to set in the menu so that the focus does not change when I'm switching the focus ring on... You're switching the focus ring on the lens in the S5. Not sure I 100% understand what your question is, Alpha. Yeah, not sure if I really understand what the question is there, but... FC, RSC2 is... Yes, it's the DJI Ronin RSC2. There's the RS2, which is bigger, more expensive. It's carbon fiber, so it's a little bit lighter weight, and you get some extra benefit, like extra functionality out of it, detachable battery, stuff like that. The RSC2 is more... It's still fine for an S1H. I carry my S1H on it. But I think it's made of like mag aluminum, so it's a little bit heavier of a gimbal. The battery is integrated into it, and the control screen on the back isn't as nice as the RS2. So it's just a matter of which features you want to look at. But yeah, it's the DJI Ronin RS2 or RSC2. Yeah, so back to Alpha, if you can give me a little more information as to what you mean by that the focus does not change when switching the focus ring on a lens in the S5, maybe I can help you, but as it stated, I'm not really sure I can answer what your question is. Hornbill says, while using a Godox OCF, off-camera flash for those that don't know, in high-speed sync, we always get band on the bottom of the frame. Any firmware update to fix this? Godox accepted this issue and said that it has always been there. If Godox acknowledged that there's an issue there and that it's always been there, it's on Godox. That wouldn't necessarily be anything that we would be doing. So yeah, you'd probably have to connect with... I mean, you'd have to talk with Godox. I haven't really ever worked too much with high-speed sync photography. So it's usually, like, I know you can run into some challenges there where if the flash isn't perfectly syncing properly or it's not communicating properly, that's where you could be running into some challenges there. But I can check with my Godox to see if I have a similar issue with it. But yeah, unfortunately, Glenn, I think it's, or not Glenn, Hornbill. Yeah, it really sounds, I mean, like if they're already saying that they know that it's there and that it's been an issue, it might be something more on the flash firmware side. Let's see here. Glenn says, want to say, you've been enjoying ProRes RAW on your S1. Yes, I am. For those that have followed enough, I am a I definitely prefer ProRes RAW over Blackmagic RAW, especially now. But I edit primarily in Premiere, so most of my stuff is usually ProRes RAW. Just is an easier workflow for me. Let's see here. Alpha says, okay, it's a 16 to 35. So if what you're saying is that you want how to set in the menu so that the focus does not change when switching the focus ring on the S5. Oh, okay. Now I'm following your question. Now that I know which lens you're talking about. So let me get my 16 to 35. So what you're talking about is if I'm using my 16 to 35 and I've used focus to where I've got the camera in focus, but then when you pull this ring back, the focus shifts. I assume that's what you're meaning. That's not something that you would be able to change because when you pull the focus ring back, it's a calibrated scale. So if you have your camera set where it's manually focused at say 5 feet in front of you, but then you pull the ring back and the ring is set at say 1/4 foot in front of you, it's going to snap the focus to 1/4 foot in front of you based on what the scale is saying. And that'll be for any lens that has a manual focus clutch. And that's because of the way basically a manual focus clutch is designed. It's designed to be an absolute value on the ring so that it's a repeatable movement as you're rotating this ring. So yeah, for a situation like that, Alpha, truthfully, I think you would want to maybe do it where if you know you're going to be manually focusing, just work with the lens with the ring pulled back, or go into the camera menu, like I'll show here. Go into the camera menu, go to the cog setting, go down to the little lens option here, and then change the focus ring control to linear, and then just set your degrees. It'll allow you to function very similar to what the actual focus clutch would be doing, just without having to pull the clutch back. So hopefully that helps a little bit. But yeah, as soon as you let me know what the lens was, I kind of figured out, hopefully I figured out that's what your issue is. Otherwise I just went off on a different issue for somebody. Let's see here. Lumix, you want a good job. Hey, this is exactly why we do these streams. These are opportunities for you to get your questions to us, get them answered by someone who works for the company, and actually, I'll brush my own shoulder off, that actually knows about our cameras and how they work. So, I'm happy to address questions that I can for everybody. Thank you for asking them. Jonathan says, I bought your S1H when it was first released. Am I still eligible to buy into Lumix Pro? I assume you mean the Platinum program. Yeah, you should be. Shouldn't be a problem there. Because I don't think when the S1H came out, I don't think we had the Pro... Well, we had launched Lumix Pro Services like kind of right at the beginning of the S series. But it was a very, kind of new program. It was relatively quiet as it was being built up. But yeah, definitely submit your information to the site. And they'll process the info and... let you know. As long as you've got a U.S., well, at least for the U.S. side of it, if you've got a U.S. serial number, you bought it from a dealer that's on our approved dealer list, that's an authorized seller of Lumix cameras, and I think I can't remember if they require the receipt up front, or proof of purchase up front, or if they only require proof of purchase when you have to send in for warranty. I think it's only if you have to send in for warranty. So, yeah, definitely go take a look at Lumix Pro Services. You should be perfectly fine to qualify for it. But obviously, it's up to that program team. I do not work for the Lumix Pro Service team. I work in the marketing side of the company. So, but yeah, if for some reason you submit it, they'll let you know what's going on, and yeah. Keep me updated if anything happens. Alan says, I bought my G9 and several Lumix lenses secondhand. Can I still enroll in the user program? Secondhand, I do not think secondhand lenses, secondhand camera and lenses, I do not believe qualify for the pro service program. Gear, so this is gear needs to have been purchased from an authorized U.S. dealer. So you have to have the proof that it was purchased from an authorized U.S. dealer if you're here in the U.S. So it's one of the benefits of purchasing from manufacturer over secondhand. Secondhand, typically you end up having to go with third-party warranty services or service plans to service and support your cameras. Or not really service and support the cameras, because if you have an issue with a Lumix camera, contact Panasonic service support directly, because we'll be the ones that can help you out. Service programs, there are other stuff out there, but we have all of our repairs are done in Florida for Lumix cameras. Glenn says, I seem to remember I had to submit receipt when I signed up. Yeah, okay, so yeah, you probably do have to submit the receipt when you sign up. So if you have, I guess back for Jonathan, if you have the receipt in an email or something like that, or if you can reach out to the dealer that you bought it from, you probably get the receipt and just submit it with the application for it. But at least in the bare minimum, get yourself in the red program, because that at least gets all your information in, and then they can update the system into platinum. It's a lot easier if you're looking to go that route. Let's see here. Marcus asks, is using a UV filter or any filter causing the AF system to work harder and therefore causing more pulsing, or are filters not an issue for DFD at all? For the most part, no, filters don't cause problems for focusing systems, and this would be true for any focusing system. The DFD system is gonna perform very similar to pretty much any other system that you're going to run into when you put a lens filter on, as far as focusing goes. Where any on-sensor focusing system stumbles is when you go to... I do have them within reach. Is when you go to something like this. If you go to a true, this is a 10-stop neutral density filter. If I put this on there, yeah, none of the focusing systems are going to work, because they typically have a minimum EV value that they can focus down to, whether it's a phase system or it's our DFD system. Our DFD system, because it uses image information to focus, can actually focus at lower light levels than a phase system. So in ultra low light scenarios, there are a couple videos that do demonstrate this. In ultra low light scenarios, a phase system can be tricked as to where those pixels actually are based on the signal noise that's coming into the sensor. Where a phase detect system looks for contrast and edge detail. The DFD system looks for contrast and edge detail. In ultra low light scenarios, you may find that actually a contrast-based system is going to be more reliable than a phase system. But again, I'll put a big caveat there. It depends. So with that, it's where certain filters, you can cause some issues for focusing. It's namely the really dark neutral density filters that you can run into problems with. But I often use a number of relatively dark lenses on my cameras, and I don't run into any problems. As an example, this filter, this is a 850 nanometer infrared filter that I use on my S1R, and I have no problems focusing with this. And that's a totally opaque filter. You can't see through it because it only passes 850 nanometer IR light through it. So, long-winded answer for some filters, yes, can cause problems. Other filters, no, you're fine. UV filters, you should be perfectly fine. And most ND filters, you're fine. Especially polarizers. Let's see here. Okay, thanks. That makes your work a bit more difficult when you're in focus while filming when you switch the ring and suddenly there's no focus. So this is where, for alpha, this is where I would say if you're gonna be doing manual focus, and you're using the 16-35 and you have to go from autofocus to manual focus, use the switch on the back of the camera in that particular scenario, because that won't change the calibrated focus point. That will hopefully, kind of mitigate that situation that you're running into. Because otherwise it's basically, if you're going to shoot manual and you know that you're going to shoot manual, just shoot with the ring back. Otherwise, yeah, it's a little bit of a different way to work for some. Let's see here. Marcus, the UV filter I use is more for protection, but if it makes a change, I will go without for indoors. Yeah, UV filters usually don't cause that big of an issue. The one thing I will say is that your description of using it for protection more than the UV side of it is definitely the more correct way modern cameras work. Modern cameras have UV filters built onto the sensor stack. So usually you don't really need UV filters like we used to. You need protection filters. And one thing that you can always look at is there are really high-end filters that you can buy that are protection filters. They're clear, shot glass. You can go with some of those things, and they definitely are nice. But if you are going to be using a UV filter on your lens for any reason at all, whether it's protection or for actually, either wanting to try to take benefit of extra UV protection on your image, buy quality filters. Cheap filters can also cause issues with reflections, ghosting. They can bring the sharpness down of your image. When you buy filters, buy quality filters. Don't just cheap out on a filter because it's a low cost option. It's the same thing with like memory cards. Don't cheap out on your storage, because if storage fails, you lose a job, that kind of thing. So yeah, you just want to invest in the proper equipment. There was a person on one of the Facebook photography groups that we were talking about power solutions and getting DCC couplers for the camera to run long-term shooting. And one of the things that I heavily advise is, if you're ever running a situation where you want to be powering your camera externally, don't buy cheap third-party garbage. You are very likely to have power problems when you buy cheap, not knockoff products, but when you buy not the name brand version of things like our DCC couplers for cameras or our AC10 adapters. You don't know if they have circuit protections built in that can actually, cut off so that you don't surge destroy your main board in your camera because of an overcurrent. A lot of those things, third-party things. It's also why I very heavily suggest against third-party batteries. You don't know what the circuitry is for protecting overcurrents and stuff like that. But I'm also not going to tell you that you can't go buy those things, because you can. It's just a matter of, if your camera gets damaged by those things, they may not be warranty covered. Let's see here. Yuri, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Yuri. Does the S1H have an IR cut coating on the sensor? Yes. All cameras have some form of IR cut filters. Different cameras, if you've been around the photo video industry long enough, you know that different cameras have different levels of infrared cut or IR cut filters built into them. There are some pretty good resources out there that explain what they do and what the differences are. As an example, my custom or my converted S1R has the IR cut filter and sensor stack, that cover glass, removed and replaced, so that I can put filters like an IR filter onto it and only let infrared light in. And yeah, some cameras respond differently depending on the IR filter they have. Some cameras, you can typically tell how strong and how good an IR cut filter is on a camera by how black fabric looks. Like our IR cut filters are really nice. You don't get IR pollution with our cameras. Others, yeah, you can get IR pollution with them, and they sell you these, not they, the brands. Other companies make inserts and filters and stuff like that that you can buy to put into it. So yeah, there's different options out there. Even for, here it is. So for my my S1R, when I want to shoot it as a regular camera, I have an actual IR cut filter. That is an actual screw-on filter that goes into the front. And these are ColoriVision, who did the conversion on my S1R. So they make all the high-quality filters that I use for infrared and stuff like that. Let's see here. The S5, I'm feeling... Carl, same problem that Hornbill has. Lumix, okay, there's the question. Hornbill Studios. Lumix S1 hangs and would not even turn off. I have to remove the battery, reinsert it, get it working. This is happening to a few of the photographers. Know of any solutions? Let me look through here. So, a couple things to take a look at. Cameras can freeze for a number of reasons. Either power solutions can cause it. So if you're getting, if a battery is not delivering proper power, it could go into like a soft crash kind of position if it undervolts. Memory cards can very seriously affect camera performance. If you're, one of the things to take a look at is, I think you said, where it just doesn't even turn off. If you're shooting and you're photographing and all of a sudden the camera just like kind of freaks out, make a couple of observations. Is the camera trying to access the card? So what I mean by observations is the icon on the camera to writing to the card flashing. With the S cameras, you can open the side door while it's writing, and it'll give you a status, and it'll beep at you and say, hey, you've got like 3, 4, 1, 10, 100 pictures writing to the card still, please wait. If when the camera soft locks like that, if you open this door and you see that it's trying to write, first troubleshooting step that I would do is change cards. Memory cards do not last forever. It is one of the biggest misconceptions that I've had numerous people having conversations with about this. If you've had cards that have been working fine for you for the last 2 to 3 years and you're a working professional, you should be replacing those cards more often. Memory cards, just like SSDs in computers or hard drives, have shelf life, or they have use life for how many times you can read, write, format, and work on the cards. So take a look at what the camera's doing when you have a soft freeze like that. Or a hard freeze in that case, if it's just up and not responding. The reason the battery drop works is because you're just cutting power and you're restarting the camera. You'll also notice that when it happens and the camera turns back on, it usually reverts back to the whatever the settings that were saved into the camera's menu settings before you dropped the battery or the last time you powered the camera off. Yeah, so most times the freezing things on cameras are usually down to either card or power. If it's a bad battery, you can go in the S1, the S1R, and the S1H do have, see if I can remember where this is. We do have in the in and out menu, you do have the ability to go into battery information. This will tell you the battery health as well as what the percentage of that battery is. Third-party batteries may try to dupe the camera in thinking that it's got a better life than it is. So every once in a while, take a look and see what the camera is rating your battery's life as. You may find that the battery you've got, if it's been charged and discharged and you've been working with it with a really, a whole lot of time, you could be running into some problems there. But yeah, so those are a couple things maybe to just take a look at. Let's see here. Hornbill says, I use Lumix batteries and I use V90 cards. I'm a really slow shooter. I cannot be a buffer. I change cards every 2 years. I certainly feel it's an issue with the camera. I hope Lumix fixes it. So again, Hornbill, just because a card is stating that it's V90 does not mean that it is a quality card. If you don't mind me asking, what brand card is it? Because I'd be very curious to know what brand of the card is that you're using. Let's see here. Carl says maybe it's because it's a Sony card, Tough 256. Well, I definitely want to know what card Hornbill you're using, because that can also help. There are known revisions of cards as time comes out. If you look in the back of your memory cards, in some cases you could have two of the same exact card that they look on face value that they're identical. Then you look on the back of it and they have different production lots and different versions and stuff like that, because cards have SD cards can have firmware as well, so there can be some problems there as to where you can be running into some of these issues. Let's see here. Sony Tough, not the Bad Batch. Just because it doesn't have the star doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad batch. One of the things that I would recommend to try, possibly, is to see if you can get yourself a relatively inexpensive but name brand V60 card. If you're a photographer, you don't necessarily need V90. V90 for a photographer gives you a bigger benefit when you're offloading photos off the card. But yeah, so using stuff like that, try to see if you can get yourself like another card, maybe not as expensive. Plug it in and see if you get the same problem. If you're not getting the same problem, then my biggest thing would be that card may actually have some issues. Your friends use SanDisk. I represent a brand, but as a photographer, I have not used SanDisk cards for a decade. And that's because I had personal major problems with SanDisk cards for a very long time. I was one of those few people that did not have problems with Lexar cards, and I still don't have problem with Lexar cards, even though they're a different company now. SD cards that I use and have never had a problem with would be ProGrade V60 V90s, the new cards. So, where is it? These guys. I'll see if I can get this to show it, that you can actually read the card. So I use these. 256 gig. These are the V90 cards. These are Cobalt cards. These are the main ones that I'm using SD card wise. As far as CF Express, since you're on an S1, I use this CF Express card, and it has been working flawlessly for me. So, but again, you got to look through, a couple different experiences. Some people can't stand other brands. It's just a matter of how often you end up using your cards and working with it. FC says, I would stay away from TLC cards. They don't last long, 1,000 write cycles. Yeah. There is so much information you can go into on SD cards and memory and, what kind of cards are good and what kind of cards are bad. A lot of it can also just come down to your shooting style. There is so much involved with memory cards. And if you've been around long enough, you know that we've had our conversations about memory cards. Not to bring that stuff up again. But yeah, there's a lot of, a lot of things to take a look at on SD cards. But I highly recommend the ProGrade cards if you want to stick away from Lexar. ProGrade, it's a solid company. They're easy to get a hold of, and you can get their stuff. Yeah, it's a little more expensive than some others, but as I forget who wrote it in the chat here before, buying the right thing, buy smart and buy once. That's kind of the motto that I run by for most things. Lawrence says, John W., when I shoot RAW, does the file metadata for color temperature display in camera on the S5? Raw stills or video, John? Because raw metadata is handled differently between photo and video. Let's see here. Alpha, does one of the elements in your 16-35 not attach to the body also move loosely? So when you have the 16-35, if you mean this, that's normal. That little like kind of click as you move. The noise that you're hearing is because we use linear motors. They're not geared on or like stepping motors. They're linear, so they're controlled by magnets to focus. So let's hear. John W., you're shooting stills. Yeah, so if you're shooting stills and you shoot raw, does it, what was the question here? Does it give you color, temperature, etc. displayed in the camera? So let me take my S1H, because it'll be the same as the S5, because our stills writing side doesn't change at all. So let me do raw. Let me take a single picture here. It'll help if I put a card back in the camera. If I could actually reach the card, that would be nice. Yes. All right, so let's take a picture. Okay, so this will actually be the last question. I didn't realize that we're already 15 minutes over. So I'm going to take a picture. So we took one image. Now I'm going to go into playback and give it a second to boot into the playback. There it goes. Cool. So if I do push the display button. So as I press the display button, you'll see that I can cycle through different menu options. One of those pages will give me 5 different pages here. So I've got my what mode I was in, the white balance there, noise reduction, different set there, what the auto white balance matrix looks like, but it isn't going to give you in the camera what the actual Kelvin temperature would be. So unfortunately that's not in the camera. That would be in something like Lightroom or one of those things that's going to read that bit of the information. Let's see here. Here's the other question. Let's see here. Backup recording. Shouldn't have to sand down a hardware production. Pretty poor. Not sure if I've missed something that's been going on in the chat. But anyway, all right. Well, we are almost 20 minutes past when we normally do these streams. So thank you all so much for all the questions, all the back and forth that we've had. These are, obviously, as you've seen, these are streams that are driven by your questions and, you know, kind of what all of you want to learn or get answers to. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, next week, the next 2 weeks worth of streams are going to be pre-recorded. So they will be getting posted up shortly to where you'll be able to, we're going to do them as a YouTube premiere. So they'll be Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I may be able to watch the chat while we're in some other setups. So feel free to join us on those 2 streams. Links, like I said, will be provided shortly, and they will be in the Lumix Live playlist. I want to remind everybody, if you want to continue these conversations and actually, you know, kind of interact with us, or continue interacting with us, make sure to go follow us over on Instagram if you don't already. We post a lot over there. We also do a lot of content that's been created by users. So if there's ever something that, you know, you're super proud of and you want to see on our page, make sure to tag us in it so that our team can see it. And if something looks really cool, we'll reach out to you. Also, if you want to continue some of these conversations, feel free to get into our messaging over on Instagram. I try to respond to them as often as I can to, you know, kind of help troubleshoot some stuff, or even just to stop over and say hi. What else? Reminder of LPS, if you're not already, make sure you get yourself registered for Lumix Pro Services Red. It's free. Get yourself on the platform. If you want the higher level of protection, make sure you get yourself on Lumix Platinum. Those are the 2 tiers here in the United States. I will make sure the links get dropped in there again. What else? As we said, if you are looking for the most up-to-date firmware information, you can take a look at the link that I just dropped down in the chat. And if you want to see more of these kinds of videos or, you know, kind of short little snippets of what a feature does in the cameras, we do have an entire playlist set up, or set of playlists over on our global YouTube channel here that will basically has Matt Frazier and Mark Toll that basically went through the S-Series menus and gave you a little, you know, kind of 2 to 5 minute long videos of what those different features do. So with that, yeah, I think that's it. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in. I look forward to seeing everybody actually fully live again after the new year. So I hope everyone has a great rest of your holiday season. I hope you all have an amazing new year. And make sure to keep an eye out for the links to our Lumix live streams that we'll be doing from CES out in Las Vegas in January. With that, thank you again. Talk to you later.